Maybe the intel girl can figure out why real shooters keep missing. The captain's voice dripped with arrogance as he tossed her a broken rifle like trash. Laughter rippled through the room, sharp and dismissive. Staff Sergeant Delia Frost didn't answer. Her hazel eyes stayed steady, her silence louder than any protest. Minutes later, she climbed the tower, heart calm, rifle flawless. 11 shots in under an hour, each one collapsing enemy positions, each one rewriting the fate of a special forces team pinned down in Afghan dirt. When the dust cleared, even the captain's hand shook as he pressed a silver challenge coin into hers. His way of saying, "You saved us all." But who was Delia Frost? And why did history erase the woman whose trigger finger changed everything? The first thing people noticed about Staff Sergeant Delia Frost wasn't the rifle. It wasn't the calloused hands that came from years of dragging steel and glass across ridgelines either. What they usually saw was a slim, quiet woman in the corner of the Tactical Operations Center, sifting through stacks of intel reports, her hazel eyes scanning satellite imagery with a detached calm. To most, she looked like just another desk-bound analyst, sharp with data, invisible in combat. But Montana had written a different story in her bones long before she wore the uniform. Delia grew up on her grandfather's ranch, where the endless horizons demanded patience and the wind carried its own secrets. Gunnery Sergeant Walter Kane, a retired Marine Scout sniper, had returned from Vietnam with scars both visible and hidden. He didn't speak much about war, but he poured his unspoken lessons into his granddaughter. While other children spent summers chasing ball games or video screens, Delia lay in the tall grass with a beat-up Leupold scope pressed against her eye. Walter Kane didn't sugarcoat. "The wind doesn't care about your pride," he would say. "The bullet listens only to physics. You can argue with people. You can't argue with the truth of the shot." By 12, Delia was reading Mirage off the hot Montana dirt. By 15, she was holding steady at 800 yards, calculating spin drift before she could legally drive. Her grandfather drilled her on discipline, breathing between heartbeats, squeezing without hesitation, respecting the power of a weapon meant to save lives by ending threats. It wasn't about glory. It was about precision, responsibility, and humility. Those lessons stuck like iron brands. When she enlisted at 18, the Army tried to categorize her neatly. Intelligence, sharp mind, analytic skills, top scores. But talent doesn't stay in the box it's assigned. During a joint training exercise, Delia stunned instructors by making 27 consecutive hits at 1,000 meters in shifting winds. Word traveled up the chain. Special units noticed. But the Army was still tangled in its own rules. Women weren't officially slotted for combat roles, and someone like Frost didn't fit the neat paperwork. So they buried her. On paper, she was just intel support. She processed targeting packages, drew up PowerPoint slides, and typed reports. To the outside world, she was another soldier in the endless machinery of military bureaucracy. But under the cover story, Delia Frost was something else entirely, a ghost behind the desk. For 18 months, she was quietly attached to task force elements operating deep in Afghanistan. While her files showed administrative duties, her real work played out through crosshairs in the thin mountain air. When night fell, or when operations demanded overwatch, she was there. The rifles she carried were heavier than most operators cared to lug, but Frost treated them like surgeons treat scalpels, tools meant for perfection, not excuses. Every mission had two realities, the one written in reports and the one lived in dirt and blood. The official record gave credit to male spotters or anonymous support fire, but the soldiers who survived knew the truth. Somewhere unseen, the intel girl had laid behind a scope, counting breaths, turning chaos into survival. And yet she wore anonymity like a second uniform. No medals, no public recognition, just quiet text messages from the wives of operators who didn't even know why their husbands came home alive. That was her fuel, not ribbons. And that was why she kept silent. It wasn't easy. Each new rotation of operators brought fresh doubt, fresh dismissals. They saw a woman with a notebook, not the ghost who had already saved dozens of lives. Frost had grown used to the smirks, the jokes about Girl Scout with a laptop. But she never corrected them. Her power lay not in arguments, but in actions. There was something haunting about her presence. While most soldiers filled silence with bravado, Delia seemed carved out of stillness. She had learned from Walter Kane that pride wasted bullets. Silence, on the other hand, sharpened them. In the eyes of bureaucracy, she remained a ghost. In the whispers of the field, she became something else. The unseen hand that shifted the balance when everything went wrong. Her grandfather's words never left her. Between heartbeats lives the perfect shot. Don't shoot for yourself. Shoot for the ones who can't. Sitting behind that desk, she looked like an intel analyst with papers and screens. But underneath it all, every breath, every calculation, every scar of discipline, Delia Frost was a sniper in disguise, a shadow hidden in plain sight. And soon the world around her would learn what ghosts can do when called into the light. The rotation arrived just before dawn, their convoy kicking up a storm of dust as the armored trucks rolled into the forward operating base. New faces, new swagger, and a new captain in charge. His name was Ryan Mercer, fresh from Fort Campbell, carrying himself like someone who believed Afghanistan was just another stage to show off his command presence. Delia Frost had seen this type before. Officers who hadn't yet been broken in by the Hindu Kush, who underestimated the land, the enemy, and worst of all, the people sitting quietly in the room who carried more experience than their ranks suggested. Mercer's first briefing was meant to set the tone. The men in his team filed into the Tactical Operations Center, still smelling of new gear and fresh patches, their boots not yet hardened by Afghan dust. He walked in last, helmet tucked under one arm, a grin that said he owned the room. "All right, gentlemen," Mercer began, slapping the map board with a gloved hand. "We've got this valley locked. Taliban activity has been creeping up, but we'll push them back before they know what hit them. Standard overwatch here, here, and here," he said, stabbing markers onto the terrain map projected on the wall. Delia sat 2 chairs down, her notes in front of her, her eyes scanning the same topographic lines Mercer was so casually dismissing. She saw it instantly. The flaw. A depression in the valley floor, running just beneath the ridgeline. To an untrained eye, it looked like nothing. But to someone who'd spent nights breathing with the scope, it was a perfect approach lane for enemy fighters. When Mercer paused, inviting token questions, Delia spoke, her voice calm but clear. "Sir, with respect, there's a blind spot here at 400 meters, she said, circling the spot on the map. "If the Taliban know the terrain, and they do, they can move a squad through this dead space undetected. They'll be inside small arms range before your overwatch can adjust." The room went quiet. Operators shifted in their chairs, eyes flicking between Frost and their captain. Some knew her reputation, though most were new enough to dismiss the intel girl. Mercer's smile froze. He tilted his head as if he hadn't heard correctly. "Excuse me?" Delia repeated herself, pointing to the contour lines that proved her case. "If they exploit this, your team will be boxed in." The captain's voice sharpened, dripping with condescension. Maybe the intel section should stick to PowerPoints and leave real fields of fire to actual shooters. A few uneasy chuckles filled the room. Not everyone was laughing. Master Sergeant Cole Ramirez, who had rotated through the base multiple times, stiffened in his chair. He knew Frost's eye for terrain wasn't guesswork. He'd seen her predictions save lives. Delia didn't flinch. Her hazel eyes stayed steady, her expression unreadable. Silence was her weapon, sharper than any rebuttal. She let Mercer's words hang in the air, knowing time would either prove her right or bury her warnings in the dust. But inside, the tension twisted. This was the burden of being the ghost behind the desk. She carried knowledge no one wanted to hear from her lips. Mercer pressed on, outlining the assault plan with the confidence of someone who hadn't yet seen his men bleed in the dirt. His tone grew louder, as if volume could overwrite the flaw in his map. Every gesture was theater. Every glance toward his operators meant to project certainty. The Afghan interpreter sitting quietly at the side of the room lowered his eyes, uncomfortable with the dismissal. Even he could sense the danger in ignoring Frost. By the time the briefing ended, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Ramirez lingered behind as the others filed out. He leaned closer to Frost, his voice low enough only she could hear. "You're right about the blind spot," he said. "I've seen them use that path before, but Mercer won't hear it, not from you. Just be ready." Delia gave the faintest nod. She didn't need validation. She needed clarity, and clarity told her that the mission ahead was already compromised. That night, as the base quieted under the thin Afghan moon, Frost replayed the exchange in her mind. Her grandfather's voice echoed, steady and uncompromising. Pride gets people killed. Don't waste breath on those who won't listen. Save your breath for the shot. In her quarters, she stripped her MRAD rifle down to its smallest pieces, cleaning each part with a surgeon's patience. Every spring, every pin, every screw carried her focus. She didn't trust equipment she hadn't touched herself. The captain might have ignored her, but the rifle never would. It answered only to truth. The clash with Mercer wasn't just about ego. It was about survival. He saw a desk jockey. She saw the trap waiting to spring in the valley. And when the time came, only one of them would be proven right. The map lines on the wall had been dismissed as abstractions, but Delia Frost knew better. They weren't just lines. They were warnings written in the earth itself. And the earth, she knew, always had the last word. The mission launched at 0300, black silhouettes moving under the cover of a moonless Afghan night. Rotor blades from the MH-60 Blackhawk whipped dust into their faces as Captain Ryan Mercer's team touched down in the valley. They moved into overwatch positions exactly as briefed, exactly as Delia Frost had warned against. At first it was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that didn't feel like peace but like a trap wound tight, waiting for the smallest trigger. Frost sat in the Tactical Operations Center, headset pressed to her ear, listening to the clipped radio chatter as the team checked in. Overwatch set, no movement. All clear on the ridge. For 20 minutes, the comms were routine. Then at 0347, the valley exploded. The Taliban came like phantoms through the blind spot Frost had marked. PKM machine guns opened up with violent chatter, tearing through the thin walls of the compound where Mercer's men had taken cover. RPG trails cut neon arcs through the night, exploding in fireballs that shook the valley. Contact! Contact! Voices screamed through the radio. Multiple shooters. Heavy fire. Delia's pulse quickened, but her hands stayed steady as she marked enemy positions on her map. It was exactly as she'd predicted. The blind spot had been the perfect approach lane. Sergeant Jason Hale, the team's designated marksman, tried to return fire with his SR-25. His voice crackled over the net, strained with panic. Weapons not cycling, jammed again. The fine Afghan dust had claimed another victim. The extractor wasn't gripping, brass was sticking, and his precision rifle had turned into dead weight. Mercer barked orders, but chaos drowned him out. Two of his men were already pinned behind a crumbling wall, bullets chewing up the mud brick around them. One screamed for a medic, his legs shredded by shrapnel. "Where's air support?" Mercer shouted into his mic. The reply came back cold and unforgiving. "Apaches weathered out, 30 miles south. Quick reaction force, 23 minutes out." 23 minutes. An eternity under fire. Frost heard every desperate word, her gut twisting. She could picture the terrain, the angles, the merciless clock ticking down. She knew what would happen. Mercer's team would either attempt a withdrawal across open ground, suicide, or hold their position and bleed out before help arrived. Inside the Teok, she felt the weight of helplessness pressing down. But she wasn't helpless. Not really. Her rifle was ready. Her training was sharper than anyone's pride, and she had warned them. On the ground, Mercer's voice cracked, the arrogance stripped away. "We need precision fire now, or we're done," Sergeant Hale cursed, slamming his useless rifle against the dirt. The team was blind without overwatch. The Taliban moved with ruthless efficiency, laying suppressive fire, maneuvering closer, tightening the noose. "Black on ammo," another soldier shouted. "We can't hold this wall much longer." Frost closed her eyes for half a second, her grandfather's voice cutting through the noise of memory. "Pride gets people killed. You don't shoot for yourself. You shoot for the ones who can't." She stood, slung her rifle, grabbed her kit. By the time she crossed the compound, the night air was thick with the smell of cordite and dust. The North Tower loomed ahead, a position high enough to command the valley, but exposed, dangerous. Mercer himself tried to block her path, fury and desperation written across his face. "You're not cleared for this, Frost." Operational security, chain of command. But Master Sergeant Cole Ramirez moved faster, shoving Mercer aside with a forceful grip on his plate carrier. His voice was steel. You want to live, Captain? Get on the radio and vector her onto targets, or start writing letters to families. Frost didn't wait for more debate. She climbed every rung of the ladder, groaning under the weight of her rifle and gear. At the top, she laid prone, breath even, scope scanning the valley. And there they were, 13 Taliban fighters spread across the terrain, all positioned exactly as she had warned. Through her scope, the chaos below looked almost still, enemy muzzle flashes flaring like fireflies in the darkness. Wind gusted, full value, 8 to 12 knots. She calculated without thinking, her body remembering what math couldn't keep up with. She tested Mercer's rifle first. Immediate malfunction. The casing jammed, extractor useless. She discarded it without hesitation, reaching for her own weapon. The one she had cleaned, rebuilt, loved like an extension of herself. The valley was a storm, but inside the glass of her scope, there was only calm. The rungs of the tower ladder groaned under Delia Frost's weight, every step vibrating through her gear and into her bones. Below, tracer fire stitched the air, angry red lines against the night. She didn't look back. She didn't need permission, didn't need validation. The choice had already been made the moment Captain Mercer ignored her warning. Now the cost of his pride was paid in blood, and she intended to stop the bleeding. At the base of the ladder, Mercer shouted up after her, but the words dissolved into chaos. Cole Ramirez pinned him with a glare that silenced protest better than any order. Let her work, Ramirez said. His voice wasn't pleading, it was final, heavy with the authority of a man who had seen too many die needlessly. Delia reached the top. Dust swirled in the valley wind, bitter against her tongue as she settled into prone position. She laid out her kit with surgical precision, spotting cards, wind meter, ballistic charts. Yet she hardly needed them. This was muscle memory, decades etched into her body from Montana fields to Afghan ridgelines. Her grandfather's words echoed in her mind, carried on the dry wind. Pride gets people killed. You don't shoot for yourself, Delia. You shoot for the ones who can't. She chambered around. The bolt slid forward, smooth and flawless. Unlike the men below, unlike the jam rifle tossed at her like trash, this weapon had never failed her, because she had never failed it. Through her Schmidt-Bender scope, the valley transformed. The chaos became geometry, angles, distances, arcs of fire. 13 Taliban fighters maneuvered with purpose, emboldened by their ambush. But Frost's world narrowed until only one target at a time existed. Shot 1 PKM gunner, 347 meters. He raked Mercer's men with suppressive fire, pinning them against a wall. Delia held 3.2 mils elevation, 0.8 mils right. She waited for the wind to dip, squeezed between heartbeats. The machine gunner slumped forward, weapon silent. Target down, Ramirez shouted into comms, his voice cutting above gunfire. The pinned operators scrambled for cover. Shot 2 distance, 1,103 meters. Fighter moving left to right across open ground. Frost led by half a body width. Breath, trigger, release. The man crumpled mid-stride, momentum carrying him face first into the dirt. Below, Mercer's men surged toward a more defensible position. Hope flickered in voices that had only known panic minutes earlier. Shot 3. An RPG gunner knelt at 743 meters, rocket angled toward the mud wall, shielding 2 wounded operators. 12 seconds to launch. She didn't calculate. She didn't think. She exhaled, and the man fell backward, the warhead rolling harmlessly into dust. Wall secure, came the shout. A life-saving understatement. Shots 4 through 7, a group of 4 fighters sprinted through a wadi, flanking from the east. Moving targets, erratic strides, low moonlight. For most shooters, impossible. For Frost, just another test of rhythm. First runner, center mass. Second, slowed by shock, fell before he hit the ground. Third, angled left, caught mid-leap. Fourth, barely 3 steps further, dropped clean. 4 rounds, 4 bodies. Less than 10 seconds. The wadi fell silent. Her breathing steadied, though her heart raced. Below, Sergeant Jason Hale's voice broke through on the net. They're falling back. "Whoever's shooting, keep it up." He still didn't know it was her. Shot 8, the battlefield shifted. A Taliban fighter scrambled toward the abandoned PKM, trying to bring it back online. Frost adjusted, placing her reticle not on him, but on the weapon's receiver. The round punched through steel, shredding the machine gun and the man both. Sparks flew, smoke rose, and a key threat was erased. Shot 9. A spotter with binoculars crouched at 1,411 meters, hidden behind jagged rock. He wasn't firing, but his hand signals had been orchestrating mortar drops closer and closer to Mercer's team. Frost held elevation at 4.1 mils, wind at full value. She waited, waited. Then the wind lulled and she pressed. The spotter fell, his binoculars clattering against stone. The mortars fell silent. Shots 10 and 11. Two fighters broke from cover simultaneously, sprinting north to cut off the evacuation route. Frost tracked the first, fired, adjusted a hair's breadth, fired again. Two bodies hit the dirt almost together, the echo of the shots blending into one. The valley went quiet. What seconds earlier had been a death trap was now a graveyard of the ambushers. 11 shots, 11 kills, 0 friendly casualties. Delia lowered her cheek from the scope, exhaling slowly. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the release of focus so sharp it bordered on painful. She blinked hard, returning from the silence between seconds back into the roaring world. On the ground, Mercer's team began moving, dragging their wounded to safer cover. Radio chatter shifted from panic to order, the kind of controlled urgency that meant survival was possible again. "Sniper, keep eyes on. We're moving to exfil." Ramirez's voice cut through. "Sniper's name is Frost. Remember it." Silence answered him, then the muted acknowledgments of men who would never forget what they just witnessed. Delia stayed on the tower as long as it took, scanning, watching, ensuring the valley offered no more surprises. But the enemy had seen enough. The survivors fled north, melting into the mountains, leaving behind the wreckage of their certainty. She lay back against the cold concrete, chest rising, exhaustion flooding in. Her grandfather's words circled once more in her head, heavy with truth. Pride gets people killed. Below, Captain Mercer stared at the tower, his arrogance stripped clean, replaced by something harder, something humbler. He had ignored her once. He wouldn't again. The Blackhawks arrived with the dawn. Their blades thumped the thin mountain air, stirring up the dust and smoke that still hung over the valley like the residue of a bad dream. By then, the gunfire had faded to silence. 11 bodies lay scattered in the terrain Delia Frost had mapped in her mind long before the first trigger squeeze. On the ground, Mercer's team staggered toward the landing zone. Two of the men leaned heavily on their comrades, wounds bandaged with tourniquets improvised in the dirt. And yet, they were alive. Against every grim calculation, they had survived an ambush designed to wipe them out. From the tower, Delia watched them move. Relief washed through her in a quiet wave, not triumph, but something softer. The knowledge that, tonight, wives would not receive folded flags, and children would not learn the meaning of final sacrifice. That was enough. When the helicopters lifted the wounded away, the valley finally fell still. For a moment, Delia let herself breathe, lowering her rifle to the floor of the tower. Her hands trembled in the aftermath, not from fear but from the sudden absence of purpose. The silence after combat was always louder than the firefight itself. Back at the forward operating base, the sun had climbed high enough to reveal every line of exhaustion etched into the faces of Mercer's men. They moved with the heavy quiet of soldiers who had looked into the abyss and somehow walked back. Delia was in the arms room, stripping her rifle down piece by piece. Cleaning soothed her. Metal, oil, precision restored. The rifle never lied to her, never dismissed her, never pretended she wasn't capable. It asked only for perfection, and in return it delivered truth. The door creaked open. She didn't look up until a shadow fell across the bench. Captain Ryan Mercer stood there, helmet under his arm, dust still streaking his face. He looked different, less polished, less certain, the bravado burned away by the valley's fire. For a long moment he said nothing. His eyes lingered on the rifle, then on her steady hands. Finally, he reached into his pocket. His hand shook slightly as he pulled out a small silver coin, etched with the insignia of Special Forces. It wasn't just metal, it was a symbol, one reserved for those who had saved lives when the odds said otherwise. Without ceremony, without words, he extended it to her. Delia paused, her eyes lifting to his. In his silence, she read the words he couldn't bring himself to say. "You saved us all." She accepted the coin. No smile, no nod, just a steady grip that met his trembling hand halfway. The weight of it wasn't in the silver, it was in the unspoken acknowledgement, the rare admission of respect from a man who had once laughed at her. Mercer exhaled and sank heavily onto a crate, elbows on his knees. His voice was low, almost broken. If Ramirez hadn't... He trailed off, shaking his head. No excuses, no deflections. Just the quiet realization of how close he had come to losing everything. Delia said nothing. Words weren't her currency. Survival was. The after-action report painted a different picture. Intelligence support provided emergency assistance during firefight. Precision fire attributed to unspecified coalition elements. No casualties sustained. Her name wasn't there. It never would be. On paper, she was still an analyst. Still non-combat support. Still invisible. Her 11 shots had vanished into the same bureaucratic fog that had hidden her entire career. But in the barracks, in whispered conversations over chow, the story spread. Operators told each other about the quiet woman behind the desk who had turned into a storm on the tower. The legend grew where the paperwork erased. Delia tucked the challenge coin into her pocket, its edges cool against her palm. She didn't need a citation. She didn't need her name in ink. She had seen the men step off those helicopters alive. She had watched hope return to eyes that had nearly gone dark. That was recognition enough. Still, the coin remained with her, a silent reminder that respect, though delayed, could be earned one shot at a time. Even when the world refused to write her into history, the men who mattered would never forget the ghost who saved them. And Delia Frost, as always, carried on in silence. 3 weeks after the ambush, the dust of the valley had long settled, but the echoes of that night had not. Word moved quickly through the special operations community. Soldiers who rotated out of Chapman carried the story with them, told in low voices over chow halls and barracks bunks. The analyst who wasn't an analyst, the ghost behind the desk who became death on the tower. Her official record still read intelligence support. No medals, no citations, no lines of recognition. But the men who lived because of her remembered, and memory was stronger than paperwork. One morning, a helicopter touched down on the base. From it stepped Command Sergeant Major Donovan Reed, a man whose reputation preceded him. He wasted little time with formalities. He sought out Frost directly, finding her in the arms room, once again cleaning her rifle as if it were the only constant in a world of shifting truths. "Frost," he said simply, his voice steady, clipped. "Pack your gear. You've been reassigned." She looked up, her brow furrowing. "Reassigned where, Sergeant Major?" Reed studied her, weighing silence against explanation. Finally, he offered both. "Fort Bragg, Special Operations Target Interdiction Course. You're going to train the next generation." The words struck harder than she expected. She had lived her life in shadows, operating unseen. Now she was being asked to step into the light, not for recognition, but to pass on what she carried. The craft, the discipline, the silence between seconds. For the first time in years, she allowed herself the smallest smile. Understood. At Fort Bragg, students whispered before they ever met her. They heard the legend from instructors who had served in Afghanistan, the ghost of Chapman, the intel girl who saved a team, and the phrase that carried on from tent to tent, class to class. Precision has no gender. When she walked into the classroom for the first time, the room fell silent, not because of her rank, but because of the weight she carried without needing to announce it. Captain Mercer himself sat in the back row as an observer, a quiet reminder that respect could be earned even from those who once doubted you. Frost said little in her introduction. She simply placed a silver challenge coin on the desk, its surface glinting under the fluorescent lights. Then she spoke, voice steady as stone. "This coin was given when a team came home alive. 11 shots, 1 valley, 0 casualties. My name will never appear on an official report. Yours might not either. That doesn't matter. What matters is this. Between heartbeats lies the perfect shot, and precision doesn't care who pulls the trigger. Precision has no gender. The room held its breath. A new generation of shooters leaned forward, listening not to a myth, but to the living proof that myths are born from truth. Delia Frost never sought the spotlight, but in the whispers of the men she saved, in the quiet respect of those she trained, her legacy was written where no redaction could reach. The story of Staff Sergeant Delia Frost reminds us that true strength is often hidden in plain sight. In her world, recognition was denied, and official records erased her name. Yet her actions saved lives, and her legacy endured in whispers and in the skills she passed on. That contrast between silence on paper and truth in memory carries lessons for all of us today. How many times in modern life do we dismiss someone because of appearances, because they don't look like the expert? How often do pride and arrogance close our ears to voices that could prevent disaster? In business meetings, classrooms, even within families, there are Delia Frosts among us, people with wisdom, patience, or skill who are overlooked until crisis reveals their worth. This story also raises an uncomfortable but vital question. Should recognition depend on titles and systems, or should it come from the lives we touch, the people we protect, and the legacy we leave? Delia's 11 shots tell us that respect should not be bound by rank, gender, or paperwork. Precision, like truth, has no bias. And so I leave you with this thought. If history erased her name, how many unsung heroes around us are being erased every day? I'd love to hear your perspective. Do you believe quiet professionals like Delia Frost shape the world more than the people whose names fill headlines? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read each one. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder of hidden strength, and subscribe for more stories that honor the unseen. Because sometimes the ones history forgets are the ones who save it.